everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are going to be talking about quiet BDSM scene ideas, because most of us would love to have an exclusive private BDSM dungeon all to ourselves, or at least it would be amazing to have a public play space we can go to whenever we want to let our kinky side out, but not let our neighbors know what we're getting up to. But unfortunately, most of us don't have access to either one of those two things, at least not as much as we'd like to. So if that's you and you're dealing with nosy neighbors or housemates, roommates, landlords, parents, other family members, other different living situations where you're not totally on your own in private, what do? How can you have fulfilling, amazing BDSM scenes without waking up the whole neighborhood or other people figuring out what you're doing? And I think if what you want to do is have a more down low approach to your BDSM, there are a few things to keep in mind. And one of those things is, of course, the types of BDSM scenes that you're doing, which we will definitely be talking about here, but also it's good to keep in mind some general advice that goes for any type of scene you might be engaging in. I think number one, of course, you have to remember that just doing quieter forms of BDSM does not mean that other people won't figure out that what you're doing is kinky. And when you're doing scenes, it's really only like one part of the whole kink experience, right? You have the toys and the gear and the costumes, and if you leave out a paddle on a nightstand or leave a butt plug on a bathroom countertop, people might end up seeing that even if the scenes you're doing are relatively unobtrusive. So be mindful of how you're storing equipment. Make sure to keep it out of direct eyesight. Keep track of what items you have. Maybe even have a list of like, all these toys go in this box, and then if you can't find one there, make sure to track it down before your parents come over for Sunday dinner, right? And if you want to make sure to be extra secure, you can get locks that you can use on things like duffel bags or luggage to make sure if anyone's like prying in your stuff, they don't have as easy access to it as they might hope to be able to have. Also, when you want to be doing quieter BDSM, you also want to make sure to like keep the shades drawn, make sure your door is closed and locked. If you don't have a door lock, you can also get a portable door lock. Now, one thing I do want to mention with that, if you do use it, that does mean in the event of an emergency, if you are locking your own door from the inside, which I think some of them allow you to do that, that does make it harder for people to be able to get into your room if something does go wrong. So be cautious if you are using a device like that, but it is really helpful, especially with things like travel. And also you can improvise simpler things, like you can have a hair tie with bells on it around your door. If you have like a door that's like one of those round knobs where it turns over, that can help you get a signal that somebody might be trying to come in if those bells start to ring. So keep those things in mind if you are trying to just be subtle with your BDSM. There are many things to keep in mind besides just the play you're engaging in. Also, even when you are doing quiet BDSM or other types of scenes, the environment you're doing it in makes a really, really big difference. If you are in a big, barely moved into apartment with hardwood floors and no furnishings anywhere, that's gonna be a lot louder no matter what you're doing versus a really lived in basement unit with like full carpet, rugs, tapestries, heavy curtains, or like really big plush couches or other pieces of furniture around. Those are all going to help absorb noise. It's overall going to be less noisy even when you're doing identical scenes. So keep that in mind when you're designing a play space and you want to convert your bedroom into a sort of quasi half dungeon. You can think about the furnishings you're using. You can think about having heavy curtains, extra blankets or pillows. You can also invest in things like a draft blocker for your door. You can use weathering strips. You can even hang a heavy quilt over your door, or even just like a heavy curtain to help block some of that sound. You can also invest in like high quality sound panels to help absorb more of that noise. Again, none of these are a guarantee, but all of those tiny little things do add up and help to insulate your noise and help keep it from getting out down the whole row of other apartments where you live. Also look out for things like floor vents. Those can also really transmit noise and make your quiet scene not so quiet. But with that in mind, what are some of my ideas for quiet BDSM scenes? I think number one, of course, has to be sensory deprivation and sensation play. Of course, I gotta start here because it's the most obvious one, right? When you're wearing things like hoods, blindfolds, earplugs, that all really allows you to stay in your body and have a very close connective experience while also not necessarily having to make a whole lot of noise. When you add on sensation play to that using things like ice cubes, feather ticklers, warm wax, massage oil, claws maybe even, all of that can really contribute to having as long of a scene as you want to have without ever really making any noise. Of course, with this, there can be a lot of equipment involved that can become expensive, but even with DIY options, you do still have some cheap alternatives. Like when I was still in university, I would use one of those like elastic book covers as a hood because a leather hood is several $100s, but an elastic book cover from, I don't know, Barnes & Noble, do they even sell those? Wherever they're from, Amazon, let's say. That's like less than $10 and it makes for a pretty good alternative. Things like a Japanese dish towel also make for a great improvised gag or blindfold, and also gags can be a good tool for limiting noise. And different gags will be better at this than others, so your mileage may vary, but that can be another way of allowing your partner to express some noise while not making it as loud as possible, right? Now, my next suggestion, I think, is a little bit unconventional. I think it's one that people wouldn't typically think of, and that would be electro-play, because electro-play comes in a wide variety of experiences depending on what device you're using. Some of them will not work for this at all. Devices like the Zapper, their whole thing is they're loud and they're visual and they are a spectacle. So when you do them, you know they're around. So don't use a Zapper for this. I think what I'm thinking of is more like a TENS unit because that can be very fun and also very quiet. And really the only sound you have to worry about is your uncontrollable laughter when your partner starts helplessly flailing around from the TENS unit. And if you don't believe me on that, there is a hilarious YouTube video that you can watch that it's people trying to make pasta while also being hooked up to TENS units or something. It's very funny. It's a great time. Also, by the way, if you don't want to have such like jerky movements like in that video, put the pads on one side of a joint together, not across a joint. That's like why the arms keep jerking like this. I'm not an expert. I'm not an electro-play top, but I think I know that at least. And certainly with electro-play, there are so many different devices and intensity levels. I can't speak to every single different device here, and I'm really just focusing on a TENS unit as a concept with this. But if you are an electro-play top, I would love to know from you, what do you think is a good quiet electro-play toy? What would you suggest and how would you use it? And with that, my next suggestion is another classic, and this would be bondage, because of course, how could I not mention bondage in this? Because there are so many options. This could be rope bondage, it could be cuffs or collars or leash training or using bondage tape or saran wrap or duct tape or vet wrap. Really, whatever your preference is, you can use it for bondage or a combination if you want to get really exciting with it. And there's not really that much of a risk, no matter how much you're using it, of it becoming loud unless your partner starts to scream while you're doing it. So that's really the only big risk. And what I like about bondage is you can use it to easily elevate other types of scenes you maybe want to be doing, right? You could use sensation play. You could tie someone up and then have them lie at your feet and watch a movie together, watch a show together. You can use bondage to elevate otherwise like pretty vanilla interactions into something that actually is and feels quite kinky. You could even use bondage to tie someone up and help keep them quiet while you're doing an edging scene, for example, if that's more your speed. It can really run the gamut from playful and platonic over to very charged is what I will say. And now that I've said that, I realized I should have used that joke for the electro-play suggestion, but I'm not a professional comedian. I'm just doing my best here with all of the very accidental puns. And my next idea is, I'm not really sure what to call this one. It's like a combination of like Simon Says, dollification, and also position training all combined together, because depending on how you approach this idea, it can really take on one of several different flavors. And the concept I have in my head is basically doing a sort of like position training Simon Says mashup, where instead of using the like traditional like Simon Says whatever, instead of saying something with your mouth, you're using hand signs instead. If you want to, you could also go up like behind your partner and whisper the directions to them if you want to have that verbal component still. But this can be a really good and fun way of playing around with position training and testing your partner. It can really be anything from like a silly fun game for littles. It could be a really super serious MS dynamic scene. It could be something more like dollification, where you are programming or like calibrating your doll in the way you would calibrate like a motion sensing device on like a game console, only instead of it being a game console, it's your partner that you're calibrating, which I think is like quite a fun scene idea. Again, it can really be a lot of different things, even for pet players as well. This definitely works there too. So lots of options, lots of ways to engage in this that again is more of a quiet scene. Now, one other thing that I think people really overlook when it comes to quiet scenes is service submission, because I think frankly a lot of people don't consider service submission to like be a scene. It's like its own like separate entity that exists outside of like most BDSM play, but service submission does work really well for quiet play, because service submission can be literally anything. I talk about this whenever I talk about service submission, so I don't really want to like dwell on this one too much, but anything you want to do for a partner can be an act of service. It could be folding their laundry, it could be giving them a foot rub, it could be doing a full body massage, it could be doing their taxes. It doesn't really matter what it is. If your intention is to give yourself to your partner and help make their life better in some way, and they want to receive that help, that can be service. And I think especially if you spend a lot of time doing more heavy, more sadomasochistic scenes, every once in a while doing one of these more like service-oriented scenes, if you like doing them, can really help refocus you on your energy, on your connection together, without having to play to like a 10 out of 10 maximum level of intensity. It really helps you reconnect and bond, and I think it can even be a form of aftercare, not only for those particular scenes that are really heavy, but also just for life, because frankly I think a lot of us could use aftercare for just life in general, for work, for everyday stress, and not just for BDSM scenes. But if your thing is pain, don't worry, I have some ideas for you too here, actually quite a number of them. I think one area that is good to look at for pain that is subtle, easy to do, and not very expensive would be looking at things like nipple clamps, zippers, even things like rubber bands, because oh boy, those can be so intense. And I really think a lot of people miss out on the joys of nipple clamps, because people go, oh, that's like a beginner thing. It's like a baby kink you do when you're just like discovering something in like, you know, an Adam and Eve kit or whatever. You know, no one ever really like plays around that kind of stuff for too long. And I think nipple clamps really can be just a great experience where you can have something that's like very mild, very intro level, very newbie friendly, all the way over to like very extreme. And it's not really that hard to find devices that work for nipple clamps, because they are all over the internet on basically any sex toy site, you want to go to any of those. They all have like a bajillion different potential nipple clamp models that you can select from. And when it comes to things like zippers or clothespins, this can also be very intense and also relatively cheap. And a zipper, if you don't know what that is, it's a string of clamps all put together in one line, and then you put them around the body in different ways, and then you yank them all off like you're starting a domino chain. And it is very intense, very painful, but also very fun to set up, especially if you like playing more with like fear, anticipation, those kinds of feelings during a scene. And if you don't want to go to the bother of trying to find like the right pair of nipple clamps or the right zipper, even the humble rubber band can be a good option here because it's quiet, it's easy to use, and it's also very easy to conceal. Do not underestimate the pain level that can be achieved with a well-placed rubber band. It is intense even for the most hardened of masochists, I would bet. Now, if you like more traditional impact play, if you want to be able to use your toys, what is the best toy to go for if you want a quieter scene? In my opinion, I think that's probably going to be a cane, but it matters what kind of caning you're going to be doing and what type of cane you're using for that. I would stay more towards the thuddy, heavier, thicker side of canes. Very light canes, especially natural canes, can have a little bit of like a whistle through the air when you move them, and I'm not sure how easy that would be to detect in every possible scenario, but it's a pretty distinct sound. However, canes that are heavier and thicker tend to produce a thuddier sensation, and not everyone is looking for that. So if you want a stingier sensation while also being cane-like, what can you do? And I think something like the handle on a wooden spatula can be a good option. I've read that is also very quiet to use. And also you can look at things like silicone spatulas, other silicone pieces of kitchen equipment. That can be a good tool to use. It is relatively quiet, but can be very stingy or very thuddy depending on how you're using it. I think also like a meat tenderizer is a good option, but I could go on and on with DIY ideas. Let's move on to the next one, which would be trampling and using boots. And I really feel like boots and trampling is a very underutilized scene type in the broader like pansexual BDSM community. It's something you will see with pro doms, but outside of that, it's really not that popular. I think part of it is, it does require a higher level of skill. I'm not going to like teach you all right now how to trample somebody with your bare feet or while using boots, but that is a skill you can learn. But even if you don't already have that skill, you can use things like your feet or boots to have a pretty effective scene. You can do foot worship, boot worship, boot licking, boot blacking. You can use the bottom of the boot actually as a tool for sensation play, and it gives a really nice like scrapey, deep, scratchy sensation depending on the texture on the bottom of the boot. You can also use it as an impact play tool where you even like put your hand into the boot and use that for spanking. I've even seen people put the bottom of boots onto a stick and have it be basically like a paddle. You can even use it lightly as a way to kick people if you're wearing boots or using your bare feet. However, being able to safely kick somebody is a whole other advanced skill. Not going to be telling you all how to do that here, but that is a skill you can look into if that kind of play is appealing for you. Now, on the opposite end of the play spectrum in some ways, you can also do things like body writing and humiliation play. And I think with humiliation play, people who don't do it have a very particular idea of what they think it must be like. They picture a very strict, stern woman in a business outfit, a hand on her hip, just like yelling obscenities and telling you how awful you are, just like screaming, and you're like cowering in a corner going, no, please stop. And it's like very intense, very, very loud. But it doesn't have to be that way. I think humiliation delivered with a smile and a whisper while you're cuddling somebody is so effective and frankly kind of, it's like emotionally sadomasochistic to another level that like normal humiliation isn't, because it's like this person cares about me and they're cuddling me and we're being so tender and loving, but then they're also telling me how awful and disappointing I am in my other ear while we're also snuggling. It's very confusing and hard to deal with. And so that can be very fun to play with if you want that juxtaposition of tender and warm and kind with mean and cruel and emotional. So that can be fun to play with. But if you don't want to use words at all, even at a whisper, you do have other tools. That is where body writing comes in, because you can use markers or makeup or body paint to write out humiliating things on your partner's body, or draw humiliating things for that matter as well. And even if you're not really into humiliation play, you can also use body writing for things like a praise kink too. So you can even flip this on its head and use it for the exact opposite reason as well. The only thing you'd have to worry about is somebody seeing you on the way to the bathroom if you have a shared bathroom environment. But besides that, it's pretty easy to clean up. It's not that much noise at all, and it's very fun. You can even leave some of the marks on longer term if you want somebody to like wear something under a piece of clothing after the scene is done. Lots of options with that. Now, my final suggestion, I already sort of hinted at already with sensation play, but that would be scratching and biting. And these are really fun to play with if you like more rough, intense, raw scenes, but you can't really do a full-on wrestling scene when you have people around your house that might be able to overhear you, and you definitely don't want to be knocking over any furniture doing a scene like that. So instead, you can kind of like distill that down into scratching and biting. And this is great because you don't have to have any equipment. You can do it anywhere, anytime. You can basically do it anywhere over your whole body if you want to, from your toes to your ears. Maybe not on the nose, but pretty much anywhere you want to, you can do scratching and biting. And it can be really wonderful overall, like full body sensation when you do this during a scene. I really think people underestimate the power of scratching and biting because it gets connected in our brains to like sort of, I don't know, try hard vanilla sexuality where it's like, oh my God, he just scratched my back all night. You know, she ran her nails down my back all night when we were having sex. And it's like, I don't know, it's not really that impressive, I guess, but like, good job. And so I think initially we might have some resistance to using this during our scenes for some people, but I think it can really be an amazing way to fully connect all over somebody's body and not have to worry about other people overhearing you. And you can also leave behind marks doing this in a way you can't necessarily do with many other types of quiet scenes. And finally, no matter what type of scene you're doing, don't forget about the power of role play. Now, if you are a brat or you have a brat on your hands that cannot be quiet to save their life and they are going to scream through every single scene no matter what you do, you know, that's a factor to consider. I get it. I know, you just got to deal with that reality. But for most people, if you can use a role play framework, it becomes much easier to deal with having to be quiet because then it doesn't feel like you have to be quiet. You're using it as a tool as part of your scene. So if you're into being a little or you do age play, then you can do things like the very classic, like, shh, we have to be quiet so mommy or daddy or the babysitter doesn't find out. If you are a pet player, you can do some training to instill the quiet command, where you know to be quiet when your partner gives you a certain command. If you want to go on the more dark and sadomasochistic side of things, you can definitely look for things like, all right, you have to be quiet because if you don't, something really, really bad's going to happen. You could even do this with interrogation play, where it's that same flavor of like, you know, if you're not quiet, something bad's going to happen to you, but it's like, all right, you got to be quiet. And if you can't be quiet or you stop answering our questions, you know, well, then something's going to happen. Even just like threatening your partner or putting in some kind of like punishment protocol in place where like, if you're loud, then this thing is going to happen, right? And be careful. Do not make it things that would motivate your partner to be louder because they actually like those things. And again, be careful with brats. But there are tools in place to make that easier to deal with if you have to be quiet. So that way it feels more like you're doing it because you want to be doing it, not because of the situation you happen to be in that moment. But whatever method you use, with a little bit of cooperation and some planning and some role play tools, you can take a scene that might otherwise feel a little bit like dampened into something that feels really fulfilling and even better because of the fact that you have to be quiet. And so With that being said, that is really all I have to share for quiet scenes. I would love to know your thoughts in a comment down below. What do you think about all of this? What are your favorite scenes to do when you have to be quiet? Any other tips, tricks, tools you use for either keeping your scenes quiet or preventing other people from hearing them? I would love to know. If you want to see more from me and you've not already, please do subscribe because I make videos twice a week and I talk about all different types of kink and BDSM related topics. And finally, if you want to support what I do, the best way you can do that is with Patreon. A link to that will be down below. If you do already support me there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.